Okay, we're back. I'm sorry for the delay, but welcome back to the Late Show. This is Young Brando, your host, live from Los Angeles. We're going to talk about the releases coming out of Geneva, Watches and Wonders. We started examining some of them yesterday night on a marathon. Of course, Rolex is the talk of town, as always. Tudor captured some attention with a couple of interesting releases. Lange and Söhne, Cartier, and Jaeger-LeCoultre as well have some very strong new watches. Patek, of course, has a few that, to me, are always unimpressive, but feel free to jump on the panel and convince me otherwise. But I think I will take a look, if you don't mind, to a few things. I'll start with the Daytona. I posted something about this on the Instagram earlier, on my Instagram account, um, about certain design elements that are given focus in this new reference 126500LN. And I think on the 60th anniversary of the Daytona, Rolex has done right by a lot of the history of this model. Of course, I'm trying to reserve final judgment on the dimensions of the watch before I actually can try one on, before I can actually see it on my wrist. It's already problematic. My wrist is too small for these kinds of watches for the most part, but it's okay. We'll see. But from an objective standpoint, joking aside, I think this is a great piece that incorporates some of the highlights from that 6-decade history of the model into this new reference. For example, as we talked a little bit about this yesterday night, the indices, the index markers for the hours, as well as the outer rings of the chronograph registers are pretty similar to the first generation of Rolex Daytona on a self-winding movement, which was the Rolex Cosmograph Daytona 16520 that was built on the Zenith El Primero caliber 400, 4030 in Rolex's lingo, which became, of course, later 4130 at the turn of the century in year 2000 with reference number 116520. And finally, with this generation, it becomes 4131, incorporating a lot of the improvements and advancements that were achieved on Rolex movements all across the board. So we have said that the new design layout on the face of the watch, on the dial of the new Rolex Daytona, largely takes after the reference number 16520, or as the collectors call it, the Zenith Daytona. What about the new bezel that in this iteration seems to take the guise of a real insert, in the sense that it sits in this ring that is made of of a matching material, of the same material as the case of the watch, here in stainless steel. Of course, that would be yellow gold, pink gold, white gold, or platinum in those precious metal Daytonas that have ceramic bezel inserts. this is also a good moment to say that all the existing Rolex Daytona references have been discontinued all across the board. It's not just the so-called John Mayer Daytona, the yellow gold um, with the green dial and red accents, but also, for example, the 116509, which was the other precious metal Daytona that John Mayer had shown in that Talking Watches video, the white gold with the blue dial red accents. And the same thing, of course, goes for the 50th anniversary Daytona, which was actually the 116506 that is also replaced. Um, and of course, there are some references that are not replaced, but something that a lot of people have not been paying attention to was the fact that there was a certain inconsistency between the case design, between the case shape, and even the case size when you compared one-to-one stainless steel Rolex Daytonas, such as the 116500, with precious metal Daytona on the bracelet, such as 116509, for example. That has been taken care of now all across the board. You have the same case, which is why Rolex basically refreshed and replaced the entire line of Daytonas. So this is the new 126500LN, which, as I've mentioned, kind of replicates the 16520, which of course made my friend and perpetual supporter of this channel, Jake Brooks, really happy, because he's a proud owner of Zenith Daytona for a few months now, and you can see that family resemblance on the face of the two watches. And when it comes to the new Serichrome tachymeter bezel insert that sits within this ring of matching material to the case, in this case stainless steel, that seems quite reminiscent of the first generations of hand-wound Rolex Daytonas, which were built on the then omnipresent Valjoux 72 as a base. They had these bakelite, or you can also simply call it acrylic inserts for the tachometer bezel. And aesthetically speaking, that is a very similar look to how Rolex seems to have renewed and refreshed the aesthetics of the Serichrome tachometer bezel insert for the new Rolex Daytona. Now, I think there might be a utilitarian aspect to this new Serichrome bezel. I have not seen at all, I have not come across such incidents when it comes to the tachymeter bezels of Rolex Daytonas. But at the end of the day, ceramic is a kind of material that's largely resistant and durable, absolutely scratch proof, but when it breaks, it really does shatter. So it might be the ring might be also a way of increasing the layer of protection you have around the tachymeter, so that you, in fact, reduce the risk of such shattering, such breaking even further. And trust me, it happens. I have just seen on Eric Koo's Instagram that his ceramic Audemars Piguet Royal Oak had completely the bracelet shattered because I think he slipped and fell on it. Let me see if I can find it. If he still has it, I will find it. But yeah, there we go. This is what happens if you are wearing a ceramic watch and you slip and fall on a surface that's relatively hard and durable itself. Um, it it must have been terrifying as an experience. Slipping and falling is not good to begin with, but to have a watch like this involved in that whole debacle couldn't have been a nice feeling. So I hope things were better for the rest of that weekend for Eric Koo, who is, of course, based here in Southern California. So, all in all, what I really like so far about the Rolex Cosmograph Daytona from my armchair or right here from the kitchen when I'm chopping these things up is that it is a design that properly honors the 6 decades of history that has preceded it, um, incorporates really some very pleasing and very interesting design elements from the recent history of the Daytona as a design. And to the naked eye, again, from these renderings, even from the live pictures that people post, it strikes me as a very balanced design. Both Aussie Expat and I commented on the fact that there is a certain symmetry to the case now, especially when it comes to the thickness of the lugs from the left flank to the right. And I think that's just good design, because a lot of times the easy and lazy, the facile way of balancing the appearance of this kind of design, of a chronograph design, is to give fatter lugs to the 9 o'clock side of the watch, to the left flank of the watch, to visually and aesthetically balance out the severity of the crown and the pushers, especially the screw down pushers on the 3 o'clock side on the right flank of the case. And somehow it seems that without having to do that, without having to play with that kind of optical illusion, Rolex came up with a successful design that still looks balanced, that still seems to wear in a balanced way on people's wrist. And they have done this by incorporating some interesting visual cues from both earlier generations of hand-wound Rolex Cosmograph Daytonas, as well as some of the first Rolex Daytonas with an integrated self-winding chronograph movement. Another favorite release of mine that I didn't attend on Instagram, but that I want to talk about now is, of course, the Black Bay 54. The funny thing about Tudor is that they are so successful for their own good at this point. They have done so well since they have resurrected their dive watch, their heritage line with the Black Bay with a little more than a decade ago already. Within the niche of collectors, within this particular YouTube space where we literally nerd out about every single detail of these timepieces, they just can't seem to please anyone. But I think it's not even that. I think they simply can't please everyone. So when they get certain things right, I think it's important to recognize it and move on, even if it may not be personally to your taste. I think, and I've said a few things about this already, when it comes to the Black Bay 54, to me, it speaks to two different aspects of the Tudor brand. One is something that they are trying to change. It's an image that they are trying to shift or at least revise a certain way. Tudor, as you know, has been historically the shield for Rolex. It is their junior brand in many ways. It is the sister brand of Rolex, both brands being in the holding of the Wilsdorf Foundation. Tudor has always had this tradition of producing the junior sized and even more feminine interpretations of the Submariner as their own. So there's that aspect. But what is more important to me is actually the fact that this looks like an early Submariner, and this is exactly what the 54 in the name means. Just as Black Bay 58 was paying tribute to the Submariners that Tudor was producing in 1958 and ended up rehearsing what essentially iterated the aesthetics of the Rolex Big Crown Submariner, reference 6538. Essentially, when it comes to Tudor Black Bay 58, what we have is a recreation of the kinds of submariners Tudor created in earlier parts of the decade, in 1954 specifically, which were even smaller and which looked eerily similar to, for example, the small crown Rolex Submariners and earlier models that were basically modified versions of the Rolex chronograph, right? That rotational bezel actually came from the so-called chronographs. And it just makes sense for Tudor to create a version that kind of looks like the small crown version of the Submariner, or better yet, like this 6204. right, which is a very early iteration of the Rolex Submariner, with a dive timer bezel that's not graduated at all. And that has this aspect of yellowish gilt, which on the dial, which Tudor used to distinguish the Black Bay 54 from Black Bay 58. And I ultimately think it's a beautiful idea to expand the line. At the end of the day, sometimes they can't please everyone, right? For one season, Tudor is criticized for making the same thing over and over, making everything the Black Bay 58 with this bezel or that bezel and that color and this kind of bracelet. When they do new things, the same people who criticize them for always making the same watch come out of the woodworks and want to criticize it as well. So ultimately, I think they have been victims of their own success. The bar is so high, and it's Tudor that set that bar, and I salute them, honestly. I think they have been doing great work. Jake Brooks says $9.99 US. Thank you so much. This feels very good. I see so much of the 16520 in the refresh. Absolutely, that's the face of the watch. I hope they don't go as big as the Tudor Chrono. I don't think there's a reason to think that. There's a reason to suspect that. The movement has only been slightly modified. There's no reason that the watch should get fatter. And if it has grown, I don't think it's a matter of 2 millimeters or anything. I think it's a much smaller thing. Yep, that's what I just said. But yes, so there are two aspects of it. One, it's like a junior Submariner, which Tudor almost always had in its catalog historically. But I think it's more like the 6204, like the early 50s Submariners, which were, in fact, 37 millimeter cases to begin with. So let's continue our journey through some of my favorite releases. We are going to talk about Jaeger-LeCoultre because I think that's a beautiful piece that they have released. Actually, a few beautiful things that they have released in bringing back some of the complications that were really popular in the 90s for the Reverso. But I do want to take a quick look at the Odysseus chronograph, which in terms of its functions, Lange demonstrates really well when it comes to this little video right here. So much drama and intrigue. It's unbelievable. No, listen, I think this is pretty cool. I don't know if you realized what was going on there, but ultimately, the idea is that they have devised the mechanism such where you have a very unique and dynamic reset to zero function. So when you stop and then press the reset, the minute counter that is also centrally deployed snaps back to zero right away. However, in the fraction of a second, the centrally deployed chronograph seconds hand, which is in red here, basically makes as many full revolutions at that speed until it snaps back to zero. So if, for example, you have timed an event that was 4 minutes and change, basically at the fraction of a second, that chronograph seconds hand makes 4 revolutions around the dial and stops at zero and meets the chronograph, meets the minute counter hand in the same place. And I think the revolution there happens in counterclockwise, if I'm not mistaken, when it comes to having timed events of 30 minutes and less, and clockwise when it comes to events that are longer than 30 minutes and more. So it's a pretty unique way of using that reset to zero function. Are there drawbacks to the watch? I think there are a few, some of which are purely financial and related to the state of the industry and the market. Others somewhat technical. I will start with my technical qualms. For a brand like Lange, which has so far designed, conceived, produced 71 distinct watch movements in 29 years of their existence. And for a brand like Lange that spent basically 6 years designing this movement, I think they could have made a minute hand that was jumping, that was ticking each second. Look, I'm a vintage watch head, so I have many old school or even neo-vintage chronographs that have minute counters that simply sweep, right? I understand it's not the only way of doing minute counters where everything ticks at the completion of each minute. But for a brand like Lange, which seems to have this fixation on precision and which takes extreme pride in producing these kinds of watches that focus on digital expression, that focus on day and date jumping right at midnight, clicking over instantaneously. I thought they would have paid attention to something like this. At least in these demonstrations, it seems like the minute counter hand, which is centrally deployed, just gradually sweeps the course of 60 minutes rather than ticking 1 minute over each time the chronograph seconds hand completes a revolution. Small qualm, just a slight nuance, maybe not so important, but I thought it was a detail that one should take a note of. The great thing is, and this seems like almost a natural progression of the watch. Yes, I'm gonna come to this, MCM. The fire and brimstone is coming on that, so just you wait. When this watch first came out in 2019 as Lange und Söhne's entry into the segment of integrated bracelet stainless steel sports watches, the way that the pushers have been used to double up as crown guards, as it were, already started giving people ideas. And already then, every single collector and every single Lange enthusiast was expecting the arrival of the Odysseus chronograph, which is finally here. So, in fact, those pushers that served as correctors for the date and the day now operate as chronograph pushers. However, when you pull the crown out, you can still use those pushers to quickly cycle through the day and the date. So that function is not canceled out. In fact, now those pushers on the 3 o'clock side of the case not only double up as crown guards, but also as chronograph pushers, as well as correctors for the date. I also love the fact that they kind of pay an homage to this utility tool watch aesthetic with a very multi-dimensional black dial, which has red accents, including the chronograph hand. And I actually appreciate the fact that they kept the small seconds dial at 6. I'm not going to even bicker about that. You can say that they could have used that as a minute counter, or they could have added perhaps an hour counter, or they could have changed and transformed all the chronograph functions to a single register expression there at 6 o'clock. But those are all personal preferences. And I think it is a perfectly Lange way of finding a relatively unique, if not entirely singular way of expressing the chronograph function. Now, I mentioned that this is not all that original. Breguet Type 21, which I think is still somehow in the lineup, uses a similar minute counter that is centrally deployed. The dimensions of the watch has grown quite a bit. So it's now 42 millimeters and change, and almost 12.5 millimeters thick. So the kind of sleekness and somewhat stately elegance that the Odysseus has in the stainless steel day date version, or in the white gold version that comes either on a leather band or a rubber band, is somehow canceled out. But at the end of the day, that was a complaint that a lot of people had about the Odysseus, that it registers mostly as a dressy piece, that it's not a real sports watch. And I think there's nothing wrong with expanding the product family in a direction where you have pieces that perhaps express that dynamic and sporty spirit in an enlarged and expansive sense. Speaking of expansive, that near homonymy should occupy us for at least a little bit. Look, I'm a huge fan of Lange as a brand, in terms of its pedigree, in terms of its history, and in terms of its present. I think they have great watches all across the board, from the simplest, time-only, ultra-thin dress watches, all the way up to triple split chronographs, to Grand Complication watches, perpetual calendars, and the Lange one, anything and everything in between. I love the brand, but it has to be said that they have discovered a rather poisonous, at least very dangerous practice, largely during the pandemic. As you know, the Odysseus came out in late 2019, and it was the spearhead that really broke the brand in a very short span of time to the public, to the mainstream. Of course, Lange and Söhne began to be revived as soon as the German reunification took place. They entered the scene with 4 new and distinct models in 1994, and they were already quite successful in their own way and in a very small way, even in early 2000s in the US, certainly in Germany, but also in Asia as well, especially Hong Kong and Singapore. But it was the ultimate niche brand. On the secondary markets, one could hardly speak of value retention. It was the kind of brand that people did not go into to invest or even bank their money. With the way that the Odysseus broke out, that sports watch brought a lot of new fans, a lot of different kinds of collectors into the brand, because once during the pandemic, people had the chance to research widely and extensively about the brand and learn about everything else they had in their range and in their history, which was already quite impressive. Right after the pandemic, people had the chance to actually go into the boutiques, go into some of their authorized dealers, and see some of these watches in person. And a lot of times, these watches did not include the Odysseus itself, because that model had become, speaking of a history of Tudor being too successful or of its own good, the Odysseus was too successful for its own good and probably too successful for Lange. In the process of that, they discovered the fact that, hey, we can, every year, we can have a release like this. We won't say it's a limited edition. We will just say it's limited by production for the most part. We will say it will be, sometimes we will put a cap on it and say it's going to be 200 pieces, 250 or 100. Sometimes we won't even say that. But ultimately, we will not only participate in this practice of scarcity marketing, but we will turn basically our entire marketing scheme into scarcity marketing by proxy. So every year now, Lange has an exorbitantly priced limited edition watch that is out of all proportion to the material used, even to the complication that is at play. I mean, for me, it really doesn't make sense for this watch to cost more than a platinum datograph up and down. Just I can't register it in my head. So essentially, they're using these kinds of hyped up watches, and again, the horology is there. I think it's a deserved hype, but the way they're utilized in terms of creating this image of scarcity and desirability around the brands um, through pieces and limited editions that are really not available to new customers, independent of the means of that customer. It doesn't really matter whether you have the resources even at all, but they will price it at a level that's prohibitive at any rate, and essentially they're basically using that to amortize the rest of the brand. Seemingly, I don't know. It's not a practice that I like. It's not something that I can condone. But then again, you know, who cares about what I think? Well, I mean, joking aside, I mean, this is pretty important, right? The idea that we talk about watches in this way exclusively as unobtainables, unattainables, luxury goods, without being able to appreciate certain things in a wider realm. It's a little discouraging. It's a little dispiriting for a younger generation of collectors who just become cynical. Um, I have a lot of, I have all the time in the day for Lange. I have a lot of respect for Lange. So it doesn't turn me away from the brand. But I know from people around me, uh, it it breaks their interest. It disturbs them, and some of these people would actually be great assets to the brand because the brand has so much more to offer than these limited editions, which on a larger scale register as marketing ploys more than anything else to me. We're continuing the theme of brands that are owned by Richemont and brands that have seen their revival, actually, as it happens, um, under the leadership of one Mr. Blumlein. And one of Blumlein's projects for revitalizing the Jaeger-LeCoultre brand in the 90s was this idea of bringing back the Reverso and bringing it back not simply, not merely as the elegant dress watch that it was, as this rectangular Art Deco object that it was, but bring it back, bring the Reverso back in a way that served as a canvas, as a platform, as a springboard for the brand to demonstrate its watchmaking capabilities to the fullest. And that effort in in the 90s resulted in what I call the Big Six. That effort produced 6 watches in the 90s that were supposed to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the model. This, by the way, if I'm not mistaken, this is actually a piece that was written last year by one of the members of our community. He can identify himself if he likes, because he writes under another nom de plume here, so I'm not gonna expose him. But this is a piece that Sohrod wrote for monochrome watches on the retrograde chronograph, which was just revived by Jaeger-LeCoultre in terms of this year's releases. And these are the 6 pieces that were released, starting with the 60e in 1991, which has a pointer date at the center of the dial, as well as a power reserve at 11 o'clock. The 1990, I want to say 1993 for the tourbillon, which was the first time that the tourbillon was integrated into this swiveling rectangular case. There was a minute repeater in 1994. The géographique, which is a certain expression of the dual time, and then finally a perpetual calendar. And in between, in 1996, there was actually this retrograde chronograph, which, true to its ideals, Jaeger-LeCoultre later interpreted and democratized in stainless steel as part of their Grand Sport line in that bullet-shaped case that I shared with you yesterday as an opportunity for a great deal. So let's look at this spirit that they are reviving in bringing back the complications to the Reverso line in this very big way. This is the Reverso Tribute chronograph. One of the marvels of that Big Six in the way that it fitted this peculiar and very fascinating complication into the newly designed Reverso Conti case. That was the new case that was introduced in 1991, and the most important task of this retrograde chronograph project was to fit that complication into this new case that was 26 by 42 millimeters and relatively thin as well. So this new model of the tribute chronograph in many ways goes with an even more minimalist design aesthetic, at least as far as the primary dial is concerned, as well as much as the primary face of the watch is concerned. It actually eliminates the activity indicator for the chronograph that was expressed as a kind of mailbox flag right here in this lower right corner of the dial. It also eliminates the date window at 6 o'clock that was present in the 1996 edition and in the original iteration of this retrograde chronograph movement. And on the flip side, it actually adds an hour and minute hand, which I don't necessarily consider intrusive or really necessary, but they're there. I'm not gonna complain about it. So you have what is essentially a much more minimalist aesthetic on the primary dial, which is your time, and then on the secondary dial, you have something slightly more elaborate with the addition of the hour hands, which were in the older version simply an oversized chronograph seconds dial. This is it. And then this fan at the imaginary 6 o'clock of that secondary dial that is actually a 30-minute totalizer, which snaps back when it completes that cycle of 30 minutes. And what you have ticking inside this watch is a hand-wound column wheel lateral clutch movement that is very beautiful aesthetically and very pleasing as well. Again, I could have done with the hour and minute hand as well as the indices on the flip side of the dial, but it's still a cool piece of design. It's still a very nice watch. And just so you know, I mean, the reason I'm not saying it's indefensible, but unnecessary is because the time on the back is not a dual time function, right? It can't be set independently. So on the chronograph side of the dial, you have exactly the same time, exactly the same hour and minutes as the primary dial of the watch. So the recto and verso don't serve as dual time. It's the same mechanism that operates both. And here's a more plain or naked appearance of the caliber. Which in its initial iteration was 829, if I'm not mistaken, and here it's an 860. And here you have, again, a price point that's not inaccessible, not entirely unreasonable, but not not that affordable either. So it's something to keep in mind. I think the case is actually a little bigger compared to the Kantai. I think this is much more similar to what I have in my Grand Dates, which is a case they call sometimes XGT, Extra Kantai. So it's a watch that I highly recommend that you try on and wear and see. MCM, thank you. Sending this super chat with a Lange on the wrist, that's 10 US dollars. I'm very grateful, which I love very much. But if I had 150,000 to spend on a chrono, which I do not, it would be an MBNF Evo sequential chrono. I actually, I actually agree with this MCM. Again, I'm a big big fan of the brand. But the notion that that a self-winding stainless steel chronograph should cost so much just because it's a limited edition. Um, I'm not quite sure. Alireza says this has been my favorite release. Oh, let's check that out. The Vacheron Constantin retrograde, but we have one more reverso that I want to look at, which is the tribute duoface tourbillon, which actually is a true duoface, which uses the two sides of the watch to full effect, right? Especially if you are going to add another set of hour hands, but it has a flying tourbillon, which has this protruding case that falls into the gadroons on the face of it. And then on the flip side, you have a secondary dial and a day and night indicator as well, with the base plate of the movement decorated with this clou de Paris or hobnail decoration. And this, of course, ultra thin tourbillon is itself a tribute to that 1993 project, which for the first time installed a tourbillon into the rectangular case of the iconic design of the brand, pardon me, which is in fact the Reverso. And it, of course, continues that tradition of using pink gold to present some of the most prestigious and limited, complicated pieces by the brand. That big six, you know, the watches that we just talked about, the tourbillon, the soixantième before everything else, the minute repeater, the retrograde chronograph, the perpetual calendar, and the géographique were all rendered in pink gold and released as limited editions of 250 pieces. So in a way, especially the stainless steel version of the Reverso Tribute chronograph makes that chronograph complication available to a wider audience, to a broader group of people. Yeah, that's my tick, Alireza. Look, I mean, I speak relatively well, but sometimes I fall into these sorts of habits of relatively habitual patterns of speech. So it happens. It happens. Alireza 2455. May this, of course, continue for many years to come. It's time for me to duoface myself into a pillow. Good night, buddy. Hey, thank you, guys. I appreciate you. Interesting. Alireza says, I have far more ticks. No, criticism is fine too, Ali. I didn't take it personally, but sometimes it's good to, good to have your habits and ticks and patterns pointed out to you, because that's the only way you can really better yourself, right? So I'm open to criticism. No worries that. The professor and well, the professor is perhaps on his way, perhaps in Britain, and has not yet woken up. And Ozzy was a little dejected earlier today. Hopefully, that's not a serious issue. He was a little bummed out about the Rolex releases, but I hope he comes back. He will come back. I basically know, but um, he was a little bummed out because, as we mentioned, the entire um, line of the Daytona has been discontinued and refreshed. So a lot of pieces that he was interested in, whether we are talking about some of the off-catalog pieces in terms of the Rainbow Daytona, um, in terms of other gem set stuff, the Meteorite dial pieces, they're all gone. They will be replaced, of course, sometimes instantly, but most probably over time with different editions and iterations. Um, but it's a little disappointing when these things happens, right? When we talked about it last night, especially through what Palway was expressing in the chat a couple of days ago. You know, people get on these wait lists. Whether they exist or not is another question, but sometimes they keep waiting for years and years of a model that's extremely desired, extremely aspired to, like the Rolex Daytona, and before they have a chance to get their allocation, the entire model line gets scrapped and they get bumped back to the back of the line. So it's not cool. That's harsh. That's harsh. Look, I'm not. You know, I think intelligence is overrated. Hard work is much more important. I think a lot of these other streams that people talk about have had times, have had periods where people were actually putting a lot of work into it, actually preparing for their streams, if only for a few minutes, studying for them. Intelligence is overrated, but hard work over long term beats everything. And if I pride myself on anything in this channel, on this platform, it's my work, and it's my ethics, and I don't change that over anything. And I don't think they can be measured in terms of IQ. You see, low IQ, high net worth. I'd rather be that. That's a good name. I like that. Um, and thank you, Moses. All right, so Vacheron Constantin too introduced a few new pieces for the Watches and Wonders. They are focused on the retrograde complication for their novelties. You can call these two watches especially as bi retrograde as well, because they have retrograde, this one retrograde date and retrograde day. I really like them all. They all have something new to offer. Let's start with the Patrimony day date retrograde, which is rather oversized, but I think again makes up for that with the richness and technique of its complication. The date is expressed in terms of this downward facing crescent that is in the upper half of the dial. And you also have a fan-like expression of the day of the week that is expressed in the lower half of the dial, and that is also a retrograde. What does that mean? As you could see by the animation of that introductory page, at the beginning of the month and at the beginning of the week, those hands snap right back, back to one and back to Monday, as is the case. And I like the fact that all these three watches focus on combining that retrograde date complication with something else, with one more trick up their sleeve. The Patrimony is a rather minimalist watch. If you look beyond the complication, it has a platinum case that is very traditional, very conservatively designed. It is, however, a kind of more muscular and modern dress watch at 42.5. I really like the combination of so-called salmon dial with a white metal, which in this case is platinum. The stick hands in combination, in juxtaposition to that beaded minute track, I think ultimately expresses something very beautiful and very elegant, and really cedes its place, cedes the center stage to the bi-retrograde complication, which really is the centerpiece of the watch. I keep saying this lately a little more often, but I think it is justified. Even though watches of a certain size and dimension become difficult to justify in terms of universal wearability, this watch inevitably will be too large for some, including me, especially for the purpose, right? I look at this as a very elegant dress watch, and it's, in my mind, too big for that. I nevertheless understand that for the expression of a certain complication, for the visibility and legibility of that complication, it is necessary sometimes to have a bigger face for the watch. And this is one of those cases. For the Patrimony day-date retrogrades, 4000 U is the reference number. The thickness is right under 10, so it should sit relatively snug to the wrist, which can balance out that size of the watch. And the pricing of the piece is not shared, unfortunately, on the website, but I will try to hunt for it for you momentarily. Okay. Let me see. I can't seem to find it instantly. I think this watch exists in other metals in the catalog already, but the platinum one is probably quite a bit of a premium over the gold version that exists for about $45,000 in the catalog. Um, let me see though, if I can find it quickly, I will let you know right away. Mm. If anyone knows the price for this watch, please drop it in the chat. I wasn't able to find it. It has a 40-hour power reserve and runs on the caliber 2460. They also have the Traditionnel tourbillon, which has this open worked treatment that exposes that pointer dates mechanism, at least parts of it. Once again, you have in the upper half of the dial a downward facing crescent for the retrograde dates, which is pointed to by a centrally deployed hand. And you have a tourbillon at 6 o'clock, which balances out this traditional design quite well. And you have a 41 millimeter pink gold case that plays really well along with those charcoal gray and slate gray accents of the dial and the leather strap on which the watch is served. This is reference 6010T. Of course, it is built on caliber 2162 R31, which carries the hallmark of Geneva. Let me see if I can find the price for this. Estimated price for this piece is about $200,000. And in addition to, of course, the open face that exposes the retrograde date mechanism, you can see how one of the screws for the tourbillon cage, which of course carries the Maltese cross as the emblem of the brand, is galvanized at a different color, at a darker color, which allows you to follow that particular screw as a kind of pointer, as a seconds hand of sorts, since this is a 60-second tourbillon, meaning it completes its revolution in an exact minute. Hey, Pauli, how are you doing, man? Nice to see you in the chat. Who are who are these people, man? Don't they have a life? All right, back to watches. So this piece is almost 200,000 euro, apparently. But it's a beautiful watch and really squeezes a lot of horology into into a 41 millimeter pink gold case. And aesthetically, it's also a very pleasing watch, both in terms of bringing together those hues of the pink gold and shades of gray, and combining it in an aesthetics that very successfully integrates the central symbol of the brand, the Maltese cross, as part of the tourbillon cage, and also as part of a small seconds sub-dial as well, accordingly. So these were the Vacheron Constantin loyalties, which focus on the retrograde complication and which bring that retrograde complication, which has this sort of dressy and romantic vibe, into the brand's sports watch. This is the moon phase retrograde for the overseas. It's going to be a boutique exclusive with that blue dial, as is expected. 41 millimeter case, about 10 and a half millimeter thickness, and it has a precise moon phase indicator, which means something very specific, that it only veers away for, I think, about a day in more than a century. So when you adjust it precisely, the next time it will need correction, I'm talking about the moon phase indicator, will be 122 years later. Which is something, of course, that really intensifies the romanticism of what is ultimately a very romantic complication to begin with, right? The moon phase complication is something that no one really needs, but a lot of horological nerds like me like quite a bit. And the fact that it can be in this way a marker of a watch being passed down, or at least potentially passed down to the next generation, I think is very evocative, very inspirational, and it's most certainly something that, to me, really adds to the horological and emotional value of a watch like this. The fact that they brought this sort of complication, which is often found on dressier watches or much more complicated pieces like a perpetual calendar, to the overseas, in combination with the retrograde dates that is expressed, pardon me, as it was the case in the upper half of the dial, I think is quite sweet. And I want to know how much this one costs as well. Just give me 1 second. A price to be confirmed, it says, for the most, for most of the Vacheron Constantin releases, so I can't really say anything for sure. But of course, this piece adopts all the elements that the Vacheron Constantin overseas has been known for since it was introduced in its third generation in 2019. So those are the three novelties by Vacheron Constantin. The Patrimony, Day-Date Retrograde, the Traditionnel Retrograde Date with the tourbillon, and the Overseas with retrograde date and a moon phase indicator. I think there may have been a few more models integrated into the Overseas line. There we go, the smaller, the reduced sized versions of the Overseas in 34.5 millimeter in diameter for this one in pink gold, and the jam set bezel version is slightly bigger at 35. And in steel, again, you have the similar two pieces, one in that iconic ink blue that actually is made in the same manufacturer as François Paul Jean's pieces. That manufacturer is called Les Cadrannières de Genève. And it is very well liked. Flat 4. Did I happen to see any of the off-catalog releases that Patek posted on its IG reel? I did. I hope they're still there. Let's check it out and let's see what they still have. I talked about this last night, the 5261, which is technically the Luce, which has a slightly different case, slightly smaller case. I like the annual calendar complication for Patek, but I feel, you know, the application of it is a little lazy and too rote for this particular case. I don't know. It feels like it's thrown together a little bit in haste. But I mean, it's an Aquanaut and it has an annual calendar. I'm sure it will be quite popular for them. I like this one. The price point would be quite important, but it is technically simpler, more minimalist expression of the travel time complication. with the additional 24-hour hand. That is this this extra syringe hand, the 5224 in pink gold. I like it. This Grand Complication that replaced basically the Grandmaster chime in reference 6300, which is a two-tone execution in white gold and pink gold. And the minute repeater 5178, which I think is quite beautiful in terms of that dial pattern that has almost sonic feel. Oh, I missed a few things here. We talked about the 6007. I thought they were extremely overpriced at $40,000, I think. The flyback chronograph travel time, we'll talk about it. And I'll check Patecaholic's Instagram too, if that's what you were asking. Let me see that if those are the off the catalog pieces. Let's take a look at those. Right, this is the new minute repeater world time that replaces the pink gold version with a cloisonné enamel. Dial. I like the paintings. I like the miniaturized paintings on these kinds of pieces. It looks quite beautiful. 5531. I have a better picture of this. I will try to bring it up. The Ruby Sets Daytona. These are extremely... Thank you, Flat4. I appreciate it. Of course, there were a few pictures of that rare handcrafts exhibition that we were talking about that puts together some of Patek's best achievements in cloisonné enamel, wood marqueterie, and other handcraft dials on clocks, on pocket watches, and on wristwatches. And let's see if they have anything else. Nothing for now. George Kramer, by the way, passed away. He was one of the best of the old guard watch journalists. So he needs to be remembered and kept in our memories. Guys, I don't watch other channels. Is it possible that one of these channels is not as active as it usually was, so that all these trolls somehow come to our neck of the woods? Is that the case? Thank you, Flat4. I love that thumbs up. I appreciate you. Thank you so much. Good morning, Memovox. Much love to Denmark, let's talk about the new Patek Philippe travel time chronograph. As you guys know, the pilot's travel time Calatrava was discontinued earlier there, the 7234, and instead of those, Patek has now introduced two models in that pilot style Calatrava case, and they combine again two of Patek's very popular and very useful complications, namely the flyback chronograph and travel time. The reference number is 5924G, and it is offered in a kind of moss green dial and petrol blue dial. Pointer dates at 12 o'clock, an oversized subsidiary seconds dial at 6 o'clock. Of course, there's a centrally deployed seconds hand, a skeletonized additional hand for reference time, and of course the AM/PM indicators for both local time and home time as well. The cases measure 42 millimeters in diameter, and they are a little more than 13 millimeters thick, with 3 Atmos 30 meters of water resistance. They are quite sizable and usable for everyday wear, although one should not necessarily mistake them for sports watches. Nevertheless, they are one of those lines in Patek Philippe that have been introduced into the 21st century, and this Pilot Calatrava is precisely that genre of a watch with which Patek Philippe is trying to disrupt this facile distinction between what is a sports watch and what is a dress watch. We were talking about how some of the steam and some of the hype that followed these Pilot's Calatrava watches has disappeared, has dissipated, and has lessened on the secondary markets. But I would assume that this new complication will probably re-energize the line and attract more interest. I should correct myself, of course, that oversized subdial at 6 o'clock is actually a minute counter, of course, not seconds, but the watch, of course, still has the centrally deployed chronograph seconds hand, and the register at 12 o'clock is a pointer date. And the pieces are priced accordingly, according to the levels that Patek has reached in this segment, and that is 64,000 Swiss francs. I'm not sure if that includes VAT or not. A lot of times when these brands advertise prices in Swiss francs or in euro, those numbers usually include the VAT unless otherwise noted, but that's not always the case. So I don't know. In this case, nothing is indicated here on Hodinkee, but the 5924 probably will bring some new attention to the Pilot's Calatrava line, since this particular combination of the two useful complications, the flyback chronograph and travel time, has been really popular elsewhere, especially in sportier expressions of Patek Philippe watches. I will start a poll in the chat just so we have at least preliminary ideas about which brand had your favorite release or releases in the Watches and Wonders. Is it Rolex? Is it Patek? Is it Jaeger-LeCoultre or other? Hey, saludos, GD. Nice to see you, man. Yeah, I kind of like this, but I'm gonna try to remain neutral for a little while longer, although you probably know more or less what I like so far, what I lean towards. We talked last night a little bit about this new Oyster Perpetual celebration, and I made the assessment that Rolex has now, along with that new emoji-laden day date, has entered properly its social media era. One might even say Rolex entered its troll arc in a certain sense, because especially when it comes to this Oyster Perpetual celebration, it seems that it adopts the word, the designation celebration in an ironic way, and seems to say, hey, you like those fancy new Neostella colors, those colorful lacquered dials? Take them all. Here, all the colors, everything that you liked in all the different sizes, will give you as one watch, and we'll be done with it. As you can see, those objects that we initially identified as perhaps air balloons or something similar, hence the word celebration, of course. These are actually perfect circles that hearken to those lacquered dials, those Neostella dials that were really popular in turquoise, in coral, in the Rolex green, and in the saffron yellow, and the candy pink. And here you see, against the background of the most overhyped color of them all, which Rolex called turquoise, and which most people embraced as and named Tiffany blue. You have the new OP in 31, 36, and 41 with the celebration. And I think the pricing, at least on the face of it, at least on paper, has not changed much, where The 31 millimeter is 5,400 in Swiss francs, 36 is 58, and 41 is 6,100 Swiss francs. I mean, I think it's an interesting approach. Honestly, I don't hate it. I don't love it, but I think it says something quite fascinating about Rolex in this at this particular point in time. I want to also see that Rolex day date. We looked a little bit at the new day date 36s, which of course have the semi-precious stone dials, but they also came up with this emoji day date that has a puzzle dial at the place of the day wheel, 7 emotions, and in the place of the days, 31 emojis apparently. The hour markers happen to be, again, the rainbow approach that Rolex has implemented and mastered largely before most of their competitors. In the Everose, you have an orange background on the dial. In the white one, you have that sky blue background, and the same in the yellow gold. And these are combined with the day dates 36s, which introduce the carnelian green aventurine, as well as a turquoise stone dial that has diamond set treatments to those dials and can be combined with a bezel that is itself set with brilliant cut diamonds. Nick Butter, thank you so much. I'm on Rolex web looking at Oyster Perpetual 28 in the blue dial. Just thought I would mention, as the audience loves the blue style. The only two watches that currently have an exhibition case back in the Rolex lineup is one, the new 1908 line that replaces Rolex's previous dress watch series, the Cellini. So Perpetual 1908, which comes alternatively in 39 millimeter yellow gold or white gold case, has an open case back that gives you a glimpse onto this self-winding movement with a skeletonized rotor. And in terms of the rest of the Rolex watches, the only piece that has an exhibition case back on an Oyster case is the new Rolex Daytona in platinum. As you can see, that was the steel version. That still has a solid case back. That's the case for the rest of the lineup, except for the platinum version, which actually has an exhibition case back that allows you to admire the caliber 4131. Let's see what we have in terms of the Oyster Perpetual 26 that our friend Nick Butter was mentioning in the chat. And thank you again, Nick, for your contribution. It matters a lot. It genuinely does help. In the 28, I don't see anything other than the bright blue, other than the sunburst blue. But I like it. Honestly, I think that's a very underrated dial color for the Oyster Perpetual. And it used to at least exist across the entire range of those sizes. I mean, in the 41.2, there should be an option. Yes. Yeah, I think that's a fantastic piece. Yeah, they're having a lot of fun with that. I wonder if these will be available in any legitimate fashion, in any unlimited number. I mean, obviously, they will be hard to obtain, but hey. Ah, okay. Now I understand what happened. Now I understand what happened. That explains everything. Thank you for clarifying that, Bizo. Look, I mean, we were talking about the Oyster Perpetual and how, in a certain sense, with the hype around those new colorful lacquered dials, the so-called Neo Stella dials, whether it was the so-called Tiffany blue or candy pink or candy apple, coral, whatever you want to call it, they were so popular that what was supposed to be the entry point into the brand, what was supposed to be the first Rolex watch for the widest group of people, suddenly started trending for multiple times its retail price on the secondary market, and was caught up in a hype that made it much more valuable on that secondary market than many of the more iconic designs by Rolex. So that was a situation that Rolex had to respond to in some way, eliminating some of those dial colors from some of the more popular sizes was a first intervention. And this troll move, I think, was a perfect end to that particular arc. I think Rolex will continue to do these kinds of moves on a yearly basis, or perhaps even more often, on the Oyster Perpetual line until it can once again become a legitimate entry point into the brand. I wanted to take a look at Cartier releases. There's a beautiful short video that kind of gives a nice summary of all the pieces. So let's check that out. All right. I think these are very interesting and very strong pieces. Let's go through them one by one, at least through most of them. The first one that we come across is Tank Normal on 7. I think it's a 7-row, right? Yeah, it's a 7-row brick, or yeah, it's like a brick bracelet. Platinum, of course, as you can tell from that beaded crown, which is set with a ruby cabochon. This is going to be a limited edition, that I'm given to understand. Probably very exclusive. These kinds of pieces are snapped up almost immediately by collectors, but this seems to be the heavy hitter of the new releases, no pun intended, because I'm sure it is, even for this sort of delicate, elegant dress piece, quite heavy, since it is platinum on a full platinum bracelet. Of course, it is matched with a beautiful classic Cartier silver dial with a railroad track for the minutes inside those Roman numerals. I think it's one of 100 in platinum. It might be a little it might be a little more in terms of the quantity for the gold version, which, as you can see, is set with a real sapphire cabochon. And it comes on a leather strap. There is another tank normal that has the 24-hour complication and an open-worked design. Again, a numbered limited edition. There's a new Tank Américain, which is, in a certain sense, a version of the Tank Centré that's a little more universally wearable, that is less unwieldy and more moderate in terms of both case size and design. This piece is renewed ever so slightly and has now a slimmer case, apparently, and it runs on the 1899 MC self-winding movements. I think Tank Américain is a very underrated model, if you ask me. Centré is usually the one that's so desired by a lot of the vintage heads, but I think the Américain has a lot of appeal and in a way a broader appeal than the Centré, because Centré is a very sultry and inviting design, but it's not always the most practical watch to wear. You have a version, well, a couple of versions of it that are more feminine and that are served up on these supple brick 3-row gold bracelets and diamond setting on the flanks of the case. This actually is my absolute favorite. It's Tank Louis, which is the classic tank in yellow gold here. It has, as you know, Cartier has this Trinity aesthetic. A lot of items in their catalog that combine 3 different shades of gold, like the ring, for example. In this case, these are not actually pieces of gold, but you have a dial that is developed like a mosaic, and through the galvanic treatment of those pieces has an appearance that combines shades of white gold with shades of yellow gold and pink gold as well. I think this is a very lovely piece, very aesthetically pleasing, and playful in the best way possible. This seems to be my favorite from the Cartier novelties so far. Upon the success of last year's Cartier Master Cartier releases, they are actually releasing these 2 lacquer dial Tank Louis watches in red and in yellow gold. And these pieces are actually hand wound as well. You have a micro rotor Santos Dumont that has the open worked treatment and a beautifully balanced dial, and a kind of model airplane that shares the center of attention with that micro rotor. Elements of the dial is detailed in blue lacquer, which gives a very distinct look. The Pasha uh, also similarly receives an open work dial treatment too. And the rest of the pieces, I think, are very interesting in the sense that they seem to merge the jewelry aesthetic and the feminine charm of Cartier with at least an aspect of horological value as well. This is the Clash Unlimited, which is a rolling beads bracelet in new violet gold. So you can see here. These were different gem set and stone set versions of that Clash. There's a jeweled tank, which is set with diamonds, rubies, and onyx. And I think the dial itself is onyx as well. And of course, chrysoprase, which is those green stones that are parts of the bracelet. It's quite beautiful and very unique, of course. I don't think you would see a lot of these kinds of pieces in many other brands. Of course, you have the Panthère, which has a triple fold déployant bracelets, and again, a few pieces that I really like. The baignoire, which is designed, of course, after a bathtub that is served up in this fashion, like a real bank style bracelet, an invisible clasp that you can just snap on. This seems like a very elegant and feminine piece. And these larger versions of the baignoire that were gem set. Yeah, I really like these releases. I wonder how they will be priced for the most part. Um, let's see what the website, what their own website offers in terms of the pricing. Mm, yeah, I think this is a beautiful watch. Again, I'm not a huge fan of skeletonized or open work movements usually, but I really like those blue lacquer accents on the lugs and on the bezel. They play along really beautifully, of course, with the heat blued hands, and of course the index markers, as well as the frame of the center of the dial that is painted in the same way with the lacquer as well. Yeah, they don't really share the prizes, but It seems really nice, and I love the way that they integrated that miniature plane as a part of that rotor. Mm. Yeah, let's see if they have already integrated these into their collections. I somehow doubt it. I think it will take a little while. Let's look at the 24-hour travel time, the 5224R in pink gold, of course, with that distinct stepped lock case with a radial guilloche decoration at the center of the dial. The Arabic numerals, of course, very prominent for the hour track in 2 digits and 24 hours. The syringe hands, I think, complement the rest of the watch really well. It's a 42 millimeter case. With a large dial, 48 hours of power reserve on this micro rotor movement. And apparently, you have a 3-position crown, which allows you at the middle position to adjust the local time in terms of 1-hour jumps back and forth in either direction. And this piece that comes on a blue nubuck strap is right under 50,000 in Swiss francs, 48,500. Very beautiful piece. I think looks in a way much as nice, if not nicer, from the back as it does from the front. I like these kinds of movements that have the architecture of a kind of pocket watch that is from a bygone era. After all, that's part of the inspiration here, but of course, it's combined with something that is much more recent, which is a micro rotor movement, which allows, of course, this watch to be as slim as it is, sinking that rotor to the same level as the bridge plates, rather than having it, of course, as a full rotor on the top of the movement. That's a platinum micro rotor, by the way. Nice. Jake, I think this is a true 24-hour dial. So what it shows right now is 8:10 for the local time and 4:10 for home time or reference time. And apparently they kind of flipped things over, so you have better visibility for the morning hours, or for the waking hours rather, where you have at the top half of the watch 600 to 1800, if you were to say it in military time, and then for the lower half of the watch you have the PM and the wee hours of the morning. I think this is very striking and rather low key, honestly, considering how how most people seem to be paying attention to the new 6007G, right? This piece, for example, the new self-winding Calatrava with that dial design that has a basket weave pattern at the center of the dial, that of course in this particular color combination harkens to carbon fiber design, especially accentuated with these calfskin leathered straps that are textured with a similar carbon fiber like pattern. These pieces that are offered with red accents, yellow accents, and blue accents are 37,850. Pardon me. Whereas, let me see where we have the new 24-hour time that should be part of the complications, I'm assuming. Okay, that they reported that wrong. This is almost $60,000. I thought that was quite a bargain at 40. Of course, that was fake news. But yeah, I really like the color of this style. It kind of reminds me of that new dial color they introduced with the Sky Dweller just for these novelties that Rolex introduced. I hope that dial color appears somewhere else in the lineup. I think that could be a beautiful color for a pink gold Daytona. Imagine with this style color. Again, I appreciate the complication. I appreciate the fact that Rolex has this sort of annual calendar GMT combo in its lineup, but the Sky Dweller never hit the right tone or hit the right note for me. So I'm not too big on it. But I really like that dial color. This is a little richer, a little deeper, but similarly very, very attractive, especially in combination with pink gold. And you can see the 5924 Gs that were just integrated. Let's see if we missed anything. Okay, so the dial is made from a gold blank, galvanized to reach that particular shade. Stamped. Which again, with the pattern not necessarily being very complex, is rather understandable. Oh, JB, did you see that? You were you were wondering about these abbreviated numerals on the dial. I'm so glad I found this for you. How does this make you feel, JB? Nice. Let's rehearse that too. I want to talk about the new IWC Ingenieur. I like it quite a lot too. I think there's a little bit of an unfair criticism of it. Um, there are elements of it that I will say might leave something to be desired, but overall, I think it's an extremely successful release. Um, it's relatively faithful in the sense that it replicates most of the central elements of design from the original 1976 Jaeger-LeCoultre design. This is a true contemporary of the Royal Oak, which was introduced in 1972, and the Patek Philippe Nautilus, which was introduced almost contemporaneously in 1976, all three being integrated bracelets, stainless steel uh, designs by Jaeger-LeCoultre. IWC had at the time, and for decades already, a watch with anti-magnetic properties that was much more of a traditionally styled round case, dressy looking piece with anti-magnetic properties that it marketed towards scientists and engineers, as the name has it. Ingenieur, as it's pronounced in German, or ingénieur is, of course, the word for engineer. Um, and the piece also had in its early iterations this carbon fiber like pattern that decorated the case. The piece was called in full Ingenieur SL for, I think, either sports line or steel line. It stood for one or the other. And because of its enlarged size at the time, it was called the Jumbo, as is the case with first generations of the Royal Oak and the Nautilus as well. There are a few differences, of course. The bezel, for example, in this case, is now genuinely screw down, whereas it was screw in the original design. There are crown guards as they had appeared also at different time periods for various iterations of this sporty integrated bracelet version of the IWC Ingenieur. The bracelet has been redesigned and streamlined in large part, and the brand uses the tagline Form und Technik for this watch, kind of the coming together of form and technology for aesthetics and engineering, as it were, in this particular Gérard design that they decided to revive in mostly faithful reproduction of what they had introduced in 1976. To revive at the time their Ingenieur line. Of course, this was a piece that was both with the help of its bezel and the soft iron case inside, as well as the solid case back, achieved that Faraday cage effect and preserved its anti-magnetic properties. Here's the original design of the watch that was penned by Gérard Jantat. As you can see, those screws are not always perfectly aligned. And as I mentioned before, the pattern in this modern iteration and this contemporary iteration is exploded in a way that echoes with the way that the tapisserie dials of the Royal Oak have kind of become larger and larger in time, from petite to grande and to mega finally. The piece has now 10 bars of water resistance, which amounts, of course, to 100 meters. And it's offered basically in 4 iterations. It's based on a caliber that IWC calls 32-111. Essentially, it's a modified, highly elaborated version of the ETA 2894-2, if I'm not mistaken. But it is highly elaborate compared to standard workhorse self-winding ETA movement, and has a 5-day power reserve, which I think is a not so negligible aspect of the piece. And at the end of the day, it is hiding behind a solid case back, which still ensures the anti-magnetic properties of the watch. I think it's not a big deal. Honestly, I have so much more to say about this, so maybe I will just share this particular point. At the time when it was introduced, the Royal Oak had the Jaeger-LeCoultre 920 caliber base, which to this day remains the thinnest self-winding watch movement with a full rotor as opposed to a micro rotor. The Nautilus 2 in its first generation, in reference 3700, was built on that same JLC Ebosch 920. And the IWC Ingenieur was actually the only one that was built on an in-house caliber at the time. And how times have changed now, when a watch doesn't have uh, a manufacturer caliber or an in-house caliber, we automatically consider it a lesser watch. That's not always the case. And in a way, the Ingenieur, unlike the Royal Oak 5402 and um, the Nautilus 3700, was more of um, of an everyday watch, more of a utilitarian bent, and I think it's not necessarily a drawback that it has a solid case back and a workhorse movement, rather than something very well refined and exquisitely decorated and finished and given an exhibition case back treatment. So I appreciate this as it is. I think the price point for the steel versions is not unreasonable. Um, After all, this is cheaper than the Girard-Perregaux Laureato. This is cheaper than the Chopard Alpine Eagle. This is cheaper than the Bulgari Octofinissimo. Um, Now, there are aspects of those watches that you might consider uh, superior to IWC's revival of the Ingenieur. But then again, I don't think anyone comes to IWC, or anyone comes back to the IWC Ingenieur because of its high horological stripes. Let's be honest about it. IWC has distinguished itself, especially in the 90s, late 80s and 90s, for making certain kind of complications, like the perpetual calendar chronograph, like the split seconds chronograph, available to a larger um, audience of enthusiasts. But ultimately, IWC really presents an an ethos and aesthetics of everyday watches, and I think Ingenieur is a great encapsulation of that. Um, it's a four model line. Basically, the stainless steel is offered in with that black carbon fiber dial, a silver dial version, and this teal colored dial that I think the brand calls Aqua. And there is also a version of it which is executed fully in titanium and is completed by an anthracite gray dial. And that piece is a little more expensive. The titanium treatment of the Ingenieur Automatic 40, that is 14,600 before tax. So 11,700 for the stainless steel pieces. And for the titanium example, which has a very cool gunmetal gray kind of aesthetic. And of course, pardon me, it's much more lithe and limber. That piece costs under 15,000, so 14,600 in US dollars specifically. I like it. I like it. It's certainly a pass for me. I think the dimensions of the case seem right. I look forward to trying them on. 40 millimeters with around 10.7 millimeters in thickness, I think. These should be very nice in stainless steel, and perhaps also an intriguing proposition for the titanium as well, which of course is more rare. I think Hermes had a very good release. By the way, a new chronograph for their H08 series. So let's check that out. I don't know if they have put it on their own website yet, but yeah, I'll have to take refuge in Instagram for this because I haven't seen it covered just yet, but I have seen it on the wrists of some enthusiasts. And there we go. Um, this is the Hermes H08 monopusher chronograph that, for the most part, preserves the visual aesthetics of the time and date models. That sort of neo field watch aesthetic with Arabic numerals on the dial that are devised in Hermes's font that was actually conceived for this particular watch, and that matches the font that peeks through in the numbers of the date window. And we have a 30-minute totalizer here. I'm guessing this is the continuous running seconds on a manufacturer caliber, probably the Vacheron base that was built on the H1837 base. The carbon composite case, this brushed ceramic bezel, and a very multi-dimensional and textured dial that seems to pick up on the interplay of the different elements of the case as well. I like it. Again, I have to know the pricing to say anything about the watch in the first place. What I really like about these watches is whatever they might cost at retail, they are quickly coming down. The time and date H08s are already right under $4,000 now in most colors. That's a decent deal for a watch like this. Let's see how they will price the chronograph. If it's not exorbitantly priced, if the price point is not prohibitive, this can be an interesting entry. And increasingly, a lot of different brands are leaning towards monopusher chronograph aesthetic. I like the fact that harkens to a bygone time almost, right? To those early chronographs. I love the fact that they have done the extra legwork of integrating everything to the crown, so there are no extra pushers. I love the minimalism that the watch exudes thanks to that. I wonder if the dimensions of the case are significantly larger than the time and date version. I would love to know that. But ultimately, first impressions, I'm I'm really, really charmed by the watch. I'm really surprised. Um, I love the fact that Hermes is leaning really hard into this. It's not just one watch they threw into their catalog. They are expanding their line. They are adding different kinds of complications, like that Le Temps Voyageur, which gave a very unique and dynamic expression of the world time complication. Again, building on that Vacheron H1837 base with a world time complication from Chronod. And here I wonder again about the exact details of the movement, but I'm really impressed aesthetically in the first place. If you would click the like button, I would really appreciate it. I will try to go for another hour and a half, but I don't know if I will be able to. I will try my best, but in the meantime, I would really be grateful if you could actually give me a little bit of a boost. Certainly, the like serves for that. If you want to contribute to the channel in other ways, all the links are actually in the video description. And of course, um, you can always ask questions or direct my attention to other new releases with a super chat as well. That is always appreciated. Yeah, I was in the back. I was looking for the jewelry and watches parts for Hermes's website, but it's not been updated yet. They don't have the new watches yet, and they also when things sell out, they remove it from the website as well to avoid any sort of confusion, which is good for them. Don't take me wrong, but it makes it really hard to reach the details of their products from their own website. But let's see, Hermes H08 Chronograph. I don't think anyone has reported on it just yet. Yeah, it's still all the information that remains from the introduction of the series, as well as that two-tone treatment of pink gold and titanium. So, as you know, earlier this year, there was the it was Carrera's 60th anniversary, and they have now revived the design with a different touch that has some elements of the vintage design, some aspects of the original Carrera, and for example, in terms of the boxed crystal, that gives the piece a kind of vintage look. But in many ways, I think in this new 39 millimeter design, the watch also gains a certain contemporary touch as well. And the two main models here both have the date combined with a 3-register look. One has the date at 6 o'clock. This is the blue dial. And that's a largely monochromatic effort on the face of it, with the tachymeter expressed on the flange of the case of the face of the watch. And then you have a reverse panda version, which again has a similar integration of the tachymeter under the boxed crystal and the dates at 12 o'clock. Of course, since these are not reeditions, vintage re-releases or such, this carries the full TAG Heuer logo, not just the Heuer logo. And I particularly like these new piston-shaped pushers, which are a great style, somehow take the functionality of vintage, functionality and accessibility of vintage styled pump pushers, but give it a very contemporary and even kind of an aggressively modern look. I like these. I think they offer something different as the cases grow, especially in chronographs, and reach 42 millimeters, 43 and a half, as the new Grand Seiko Tantograph has it, for example. These TAG Heuer Carrera watches in 39 millimeter that are built on a version of their H02 caliber. Here it's TH20-00. Of course, it's self-winding with a power reserve of 80 hours, beating at 4 hertz. Both of these pieces are almost immediately available, and they're priced at 6,450. Again, the new normal dictates that ought to register as a reasonable price. I like the blue, which is really striking, but there's a lot of dimensionality of this black dial with contrasting registers. And I like this touch they call glass box, the boxed crystal that integrates the tachometer on the flange rather than as an additional bezel. That's a great look. Somehow splits the difference between a very traditional minimalist chronograph design with something that looks like belongs to bygone space age. Yeah, I remember them earlier, but I think maybe it's proper to just bring him up. George Kramer was a journalist from almost bygone era. More recently, used to write for Fratello watches, a lot of times exploring Cartier, but also other watches and other collectors, other watches and other brands as well. And he passed away, I think, either yesterday or 2 days ago. Um, but it struck me as very surprising because I had no idea that he was dealing with anything at all. So it's a shame. Truly, the kind of um, character, the kind of depth of knowledge, attention, and care that I can only aspire to. Um, a wonderful man. Yeah. Yeah. Life is short. Life is short. We better make the best of the limited time we have on this earth. Uh, I'll be I'll be honest, Chris. I don't actually know Don Haynes. I'm not familiar with the work, so please let me know who that is. If that person has an Instagram handle or anything, I would love to get in touch. If you think it's a good guest, I'm sure he's a good guest. Jeff Lane, thank you. Jake Brooks, thank you for the thumbs up. GD, I appreciate you. Thank you, everyone, for hitting the like button. It really, really does make a difference. Trust me. The little momentum that I have picked up in the last month or so, it's really thanks to you. It's thanks to people who keep watching the live stream night after night, who hit the like button, who leave comments, who contribute with their super chats. Those are the things that push us further in the algorithm. It doesn't happen magically on its own, just because I'm doing good work or just because I'm working hard, right? I always need an extra push from you. I always need some support from you. Memovox says, yes, I like what TAG Heuer have done. Laurent Ferrier Square, Micro Rotor Evergreen, and LUC Chopard 1860 are favorites of mine too. Not a bad year. Yeah, we were talking about the Laurent Ferrier Evergreen pieces last night. I love that brand. Uh, you know, Pure and simple. I love the designs, especially the square case design, which reminds me of very elegant reworking of that classic Rolex Oyster case that most people are more familiar uh, from the context of Panerai, of course. Um, and that combination is actually not entirely out of place here because this particular dial color against the white metal, which is here, of course, stainless steel, really reminds me of that particular shade of green that Panerai uses in their platinum limited editions. They call it sage green, I think, but it's a beautiful, beautiful color. And the evergreen here, I completely agree. And of course, the business side of this watch is always fascinating as well. Great micro rotor with that snail decoration. Um, the free sprung balance, the escapement, and the finishing of the bridge plates. I think it's at once quite minimalistic, but also aesthetically striking as well. The price point at retail is, phew, um, it makes my eyes bleed, but uh, I'm sure it's well deserved because the quality that the collectors report on, that I so far didn't actually have a chance to experience on my own, even on a trial basis. Um, the quality is there for sure. And on the secondary market, you can find some very intriguing deals for less limited versions for sure. Now, when it comes to Chopard, I talked a little bit about this uh, last night, and I was exchanging messages earlier in the day on YouTube comments with one of the audience members, one of the subscribers here on YouTube, and that was Whole Milk. And I was trying to explain my position on this particular watch because, I'm actually a fan of the Alpine Eagle, but I had a few points of criticism about the standard model, the Alpine Eagle 41, in its usual appearance. I think has, first of all, a kind of oversized date, which I find a little intrusive, and a rather substandard movement um, for Chopard's own standards, right? Chopard, again, is a brand, especially through its two workshops in Geneva, and Fleurier, set the bar so high that sometimes they don't quite deliver or fail to deliver to the quality that comes to be expected from them. So I always said, when it came to the Alpine Eagle, they should have a watch that brings the quality of the LUC in terms of its movements, in terms of its finishing, in terms of the kind of elegance and sleekness that I associate with those pieces. And I said maybe they would be even justified to price it in low 20s. And I was especially thinking about this after having tried the flying tourbillon version of this piece. That was right here. Because as you can see, this is a much thinner piece. It's a much sleeker piece. It also has a thinner bezel, and of course, eliminates the date window. So I was thinking that bringing a micro rotor caliber from the LUC line, specifically the caliber 96 base, would be an incredible improvement for this range. And they have done this with the Alpine Eagle 41 XPS, which they priced as if they used me as a focus group onto my own at the low 20s, 22,500. As you can see, it is a smaller watch, it is a sleeker watch, and it is a thinner watch compared to the standard 41 model. And of course, it is a piece that is assembled and finished to the standards that are expected from a watch that carries the hallmark of Geneva, both on its case and on its movement. I think this is a great piece. I cannot say it's a value proposition. Its immediate competitor is, of course, the Vacheron Constantin overseas, which is priced a smidgen more than this. And that is also a watch that carries the hallmark of Geneva. So it makes sense to think of it in parallel with Chopard's new Alpine Eagle. Not only because both are integrated bracelets, stainless steel, sports chic watches, but I think this offers something interesting and something new. When it comes to the LUC 1860, I love that as well. For me, again, I'm a huge fan of the Salmon dial. I'm a huge fan of the Chopard LUC series. It can frankly be my next watch. I mean, I don't think I would buy something like this or one of their other Geneva Seal or even Qualité Fleurier watches at retail. But on the secondary market, sometimes you can find great deals on these. The LUC 1860 is, of course, smaller, very much conservative dress watch proportions. It's beautiful, beautiful caliber 96 base micro rotor movement with a 68-hour power reserve in steel here, which makes it very charming in combination with that Salmon dial, especially. And of course, Chopard actually is, how should I put this? Carl Friedrich Schäufele, who owns Chopard, also owns Metallum, which is, of course, one of the famous and most cherished dial makers, especially when it comes to guilloche dials. And as you see, there is here a very beautiful rosette guilloche pattern that emanates from that cursive branding that is set apart. And you also have wonderful radial guilloche for the small seconds dial. I like it. Oh no, that's completely fine. I'm also, look, I mean, to be brutally honest, I think for that segment, for that category, the new Alpine Eagle is something interesting. It's an intriguing proposition, even though the design is not highly original. But you can make the same kind of criticism for the overseas too. But that aside, if you ask me, Memovox, between those two watches, what would I go to? What would be my choice? I would also go for something like the LUC 1860. I would go for something like the Twist XPS. I would go for something like the earlier Qualité Fleurier chronometers. Yeah, I'm a bigger fan of Chopard or LUC Chopard's dress watches as opposed to their integrated bracelets watch, whether we are talking about the earlier iterations of the Sankt Moritz or this particular revival of it, which is called the Alpine Eagle. Just give me 1 second. Is this new, the chronograph? I've never seen it, although that doesn't mean much when it comes to this particular piece. That looks like a beautiful movement. I'm kind of disappointed by how it's fit into a larger case in this manner that I consider very much cheating when you think of this ring. Did it really need to be 42 millimeters? But it is what it is. Yeah, it is new apparently, and a limited edition of 25 pieces in stainless steel with that sunray brushed racing green dial with the brushing or the sun rays emanating from the brand right under 12 o'clock. And it's priced at 32,300. It's a lot. It's a lot, but that's a very nice hand-wound chronograph movement. I wish they used it in a more conservatively and dare I say appropriately sized case. And once again, see 1860 was 23,200 with that distinctive salmon dial with guilloche decoration at its center. And finally, the Alpine Eagle 41 XPS was priced at 22,500. Of course, this is a watch that's sleeker, that has higher performance than the standard Alpine Eagle, and that carries the hallmark of Geneva inside and out. Whether that justifies the $8,000 premium is, of course, a decision that I respectfully leave to you. Coming back to the Santos Dumont skeleton, it is apparently released in 3 metals, so yellow gold with blue lacquer details, pink gold with red lacquer details that are used on a much smaller scale, and the white gold version, which is beautifully minimalist and seemingly more technical looking. I think they're very cool. In a way, I always prefer the Santos Dumont to the newly designed Santos. I like this new micro rotor caliber they came up with in 9629. I'm glad again they didn't just do an open work dial. They actually designed a proprietary caliber for it. Pardon me, I really really appreciate these. Okay, that's steel, by the way, not yellow gold. Okay, and I think the yellow gold version is limited for 100 pieces, whereas the stainless steel and pink gold are not. The price is not yet announced, but I think they all offer something quite unique and interesting, aesthetically speaking, and they are all built on the same newly designed micro rotor caliber. So the case is apparently just 8 millimeters thick. So it's nice to know that they took full advantage of that micro rotor movement. Of course, the precious metal versions are set with real sapphire cabochon. I'm guessing the stainless steel might not necessarily be that, but possibly. But I really like to know more about this caliber in terms of the winding of the micro rotor. Is it winding bidirectionally or in a single direction? How many hours of power reserve does it hold? These can be sometimes details that make all the difference when it comes to micro rotor movements, some of which can still be a little finicky. Sometimes they don't wind and charge as well as automatic caliber with a full rotor, much less, of course, a hand wound caliber. And they can be a little poor in terms of the power reserve sometimes. So I hope the caliber doesn't disappoint on those levels in those dimensions, because aesthetically it looks beautiful, and it certainly presents a great asset for the watch, both in terms of its off-center design and in terms of the sleek profile that it allows for this beautiful dress watch that looks almost like an entirely new creation in each metal that is presented here. Yeah, I certainly appreciate these. Wow. Let's take a closer look at the new Tank Normal series as well. We got a glimpse of a lot of these in the video that Cartier shared. Of course, there is the private collection versions, the platinum on the full bracelets, the yellow gold on the full bracelets. There is an open worked version as well. And then there are leather strap versions of both the yellow gold and the platinum as well. These all belong to the Privé collection, which are usually quite limited and carry a healthy premium, let's put it like that. Apparently, each piece is going to be limited to 200. Another 50 are made with skeletonized movements. And these are 24-hour dial watches again. So the minute hand, of course, makes a full revolution in 60 minutes, whereas the hour hand actually takes the full 24 hours to go through the day, go through its full revolution. And these will be apparently 100 pieces each, platinum and yellow gold. With that brushed finish that gives what are otherwise very elegant and striking pieces a kind of muted and conservative appearance, which kind of fits with the long-term house aesthetic of Cartier. Yeah, it really looks amazing on that matching bracelet in platinum. So they're going to be very limited, probably exorbitantly priced, but it remains to be seen. Once again, 200 pieces per medal on straps, 100 pieces per medal with the matching bracelets, 50 pieces in each medal with skeletonized movements, and finally a 20-piece run of the open worked version that is also diamond set, as you can see, for the 24-hour version. We talked also about the new Tank Américain, which I think was conceived in 1987, I want to say, introduced to the American markets probably in 88 or 89. And it took, of course, its inspiration from the original Roaring 20s design of the Cartier Tank Cintré, which has this sort of elongated, sultry shape on the wrist. Américain streamlines it a little bit, makes it a little more universally wearable, in steel and pink golds. I think this is the medium case size, I want to say, rather than the large or the mini. And on the smaller version, on the so-called mini, it also has these particular touches that have diamond set treatments, I should say, diamond set flanks, and also diamond sets with that 3-row brick bracelet that's very supple and malleable, as we have seen in that video. There's a fully diamond encrusted version of it too. Very nice. And thanks to the new caliber 1899 MC, they're also slimmer than the older generation. Unfortunately, the prices are not yet provided, but I would love to see how they square up, how they line up in terms of the price point. I think it should be still very attractive in steel, especially. I think that's a great piece to begin with, and I'm glad they have expanded the line and renewed it ever so slightly, so that it takes its rightful place in the rest of the lineup. Because I think in many ways the Tank Américain is still quite underrated and flies largely under the radar. We were talking about how popular the last year's Must de Cartier was, and they have picked up on that clearly and introduced 2 versions of the Tank Louis with these shiny lacquered dials, green and red. Both in yellow gold. The one that I really like in this particular line is this mosaic dial, which through a galvanized treatment expresses a version of Cartier's Trinity, the tricolor or 3 different shades of the gold that they offer in their lineup. There's also a version of that that is a little more streamlined and maybe kind of takes I don't know, maybe like a Mondrian kind of artistic expression. I like them all. I think the lacquered dials are pretty striking. I would completely rock the burgundy one, which is a great combination with yellow gold. But this galvanic trinity on the dial, I think is my absolute favorite. All right, so I think I will go for another 40 minutes, just so you guys know. So if you have any questions, any requests, it's best to send them in sooner than later, because who knows, I might just suddenly disappear, suddenly expire. Hopefully not, but I'll try my best. I want to see, I think there were a few other releases by TAG Heuer that that we have probably not treated. We looked at the 39 millimeter Carrera, but I think there is more. They also have like a 42 millimeter version, as well as different treatments of the Aqua Racer, and of course, like a tourbillon version of the Carrera as well. So we have looked at the glass box treatments, 39 millimeter case pieces, the 3 register with the date window, alternatively at noon or 6 o'clock. There is there's a chronograph tourbillon that is introduced in a 42 millimeter stainless steel case. Orange chronograph seconds dial that is centrally deployed. And orange accents also. It looks pretty nice, honestly, at least in that simulation that their or animation that their web page itself shows. The price is $24,050. And of course, the tourbillon, which itself is a regulating device, but in this case, it is caliber TH20-09, and it is COSC certified. So it is a chronometer. There are also 2 versions of the automatic chronograph that have this racing theme, and bolder and large cases at 42 millimeters with, once again, distinct accents in different shades of orange against the background of blue dial here, the H02 movement, and a kind of dark, what is it, dark brown slash charcoal gray / black here, again with the same variation of gradient orange accents. And both those pieces are priced right under $6,000 with these enlarged 42 millimeter cases, 3 register chronographs with the date at 6 o'clock. Therefore, listed for $5,750. Well, I'm not sure, my friend. I don't think. The sad thing is, even on the secondary markets, 24,000 doesn't get you a lot in terms of Patek. You can get a lot of interesting dress watches in that kind of bracelet genre with $10,000-15,000. A lot of interesting smaller size ellipses, again, 10 to 15,000 for maybe a little more. You can get some Calatravas up to 20-25,000. Some Calatravas that some of which would be a little minuscule and diminutive for our standards today, even though I like smaller watches, to be honest. And others that are around 36-37 millimeters. And this is $24,000 because it's a tourbillon. I'm not a huge fan of tourbillons myself. I mean, I like the animation. I like the life at tourbillon, especially a flying tourbillon endows to the face of the watch. Nevertheless, it's a lot of money for essentially just pure joy. So not sure if it ever justifies, but this is a nice visual with that glass box treatment. I wouldn't pay this kind of money for TAG Heuer either. So you have your feeling in the right place there. Unfortunately, that money doesn't get you too far in the Patek realm either. I think, yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Yacht-Master, because I was very excited about what remained to come from the Yacht-Master. We have been waiting for a titanium Yacht-Master for a few years now, especially ever since we have seen it on the wrist of the Sir Ben Ainslie. Now, I was expecting it to be on an Oyster Flex. In hindsight, I'm not surprised that they served it with the full bracelet. I also don't hate the finishing that this has received, which is mostly muted and very satin and rather dark, because ultimately I think they just want to have that distinction in terms of the appearance of titanium from stainless steel watches in the range. So I don't have a problem with that, nor with the fact that it's 42 millimeters. I think that's a good size for it, especially because, again, I look at this watch in particular, but also more broadly at the Yacht-Master product family as Submariner 2.0. Take it one way or another, but to me, this is like a different approach to that same genre. Certain aspects of the Yacht-Master line might be understood as a more luxurious approach to the Submariner genre, to the dive watch genre, whereas this one is a little more utilitarian, a little more toolish. I would have loved to see this without the date, as we had seen it on the wrist of Ben Ainsley, which did not actually have the date, and which had, for that reason, a very balanced and muted classic look. So I don't know if that's ever going to be an option. Of course, this case has more of the lines of the classic Yacht-Master case, which is a little more elegant, a little more stylized, especially in terms of the drooping of the lugs. I don't mind the new finish. That's a little more brutish, a little more utilitarian, and a little more distinctive in terms of separating the grade 5 titanium from stainless steel that already exists in the product lineup. But I just wish Rolex released more sports watches, more watches in their professional range that did not have the Cyclops, that did not have the date window. That's my minor quibble with the new Yacht-Master, which I actually like quite a lot. But I've already had a soft spot for the Yacht-Master product family. As far as I understand, unfortunately, the bracelet doesn't have a glide lock, which is a shame. I wonder if that's something that they will take time to integrate to this bracelet, or whether it is another trick Rolex does to distinguish titanium pieces from stainless steel. I don't know that, but speaking of price points and that's interesting. Why is there no 42? Okay, size. Yeah, speaking of price points and accessibility, I don't know if this is how popular this will be. I have a feeling that since it's the first Rolex titanium watch that has this sort of everyday appeal, that is something that you can unabashedly wear on a daily basis, unlike the deep sea challenge. I think this will be a very popular one. For 14,050, it's also, I think, relatively reasonable within the Rolex lineup. Let me see if I may have 1 second to get a quick drink of water. I'll be right back. But I want to leave you with something on the screen. So bear with me. Um, there we go. We have here, again, aesthetically speaking, one of my favorite releases. I had already liked the GMT Rattrapante for the Tanda PF. I thought it was a very, very nice way of reinterpreting and even reimagining the Rattrapante complication. At that time, of course, it was the hour hand that was understood in this way, where you could set it independently by jumping the hour ahead with the help of the pusher at 8 o'clock right here. And finally, when you are back home, right, you could press that pink gold pusher on the crown for the the two hour hands to catch up with each other. So the rattrapante. In this case, we basically have a complication that you can think of it as a kind of rudimentary chronograph, but what it really replaces is the kind of functionality that we expect and we usually derive from rotational timing bezel, like a dive timer, for example. In this case, you have an additional minute hand that is distinct from the rhodium plated one, this pink gold one. And it is basically, it can be adjusted in in 5 minutes increments by using the pusher at 8 o'clock, and 1 minute increments by using the pusher at 10 o'clock. So you can basically set a timer by increments of 1 minute at a time, or 5 minutes at a time, or any permutation, any combination of these two. And then the time elapses, of course, by the time the rhodium plated hand catches up with the pink, and you can stop it at any time by pressing the extra pusher on the crown, which will reset the timer. So you can understand the piece either as a rudimentary expression of a chronograph, or a very elaborated, if slightly contrived, expression of timing bezel. Take care, Memovox. Nice to see you, and thank you for your comment on the Yacht-Master as well. And of course, the piece is executed in stainless steel with the integrated bracelet that is finished in varying facets of mirror polish and brushed grain. The piece has its distinctive platinum bezel that is both polished but also fluted in this fine fashion all around, which gives you an extra sheen with that cold expression of the platinum. And the dial has this taupe color, which I think makes that barley corn pattern even more subtle for this particular piece. Let's take a look at how they tell this story. And of course, you have that micro rotor caliber that has been designed by Michel Parmigiani as well. Again, I wish, in a way, I wish they had used this rattrapante complication in a manner that interpreted it as a more traditional chronograph. I know they already have the Tonda GT line, but I think they are kind of dwelling in this strange place where they're already aware of the kind of value they offer. They're already aware of the weight that the name Parmigiani carries in the world of watchmaking. They're already aware of the legacy of Michel Parmigiani, but they already know also that they need to think outside of the box, that they need to, in a way, reinvent the wheel. And I guess their new house signature, their new key design element is to find ways of reinterpreting and re-expressing traditional complications and simplifying those complications, as they put it here, very simply, very clearly, very distinctly, the simplification of complication. The idea behind Temps de PF, minute rattrapante, was simple: to perform the function typically operated by a graduated bezel on a diver's watch via the movement itself. A watch that is not only user-friendly, but also offers excellent legibility and apparent simplicity right down to the activating function, while the Tonda PF GMT rattrapante enables a distinction between local and home time in 1 hour increments. This new development of the function now serves to display the minutes in 5 or 1 minutes increments, respectively. 5-minute increments with this pusher at 8 o'clock and 1-minute increments here with this pusher at 10 o'clock. It is apparently going to be available in September. And the price is going to be 28,000 in Swiss francs. The GMT rattrapante, of course, was priced similarly. The time and date version is 22,000 with the micro rotor movement. The GMT rattrapante is similarly priced at 27,000 Swiss francs. And you also have reduced sized versions of the piece with a self-winding caliber that is a little more performance oriented, as it happens, because it has a 60-hour power reserve compared to the 48-hour 2-day power reserve of the micro rotor version. And that piece, in its most minimalist version with abbreviated markers and a simple 2-hand time-only watch, is listed right under 20,000 in Swiss francs, 19,500. And that is 36 millimeters in diameter for the integrated bracelet watch, which wears significantly larger than that. whereas the classic micro rotor interpretation of the Tonda PF is a 40 millimeter piece. All right, so last 10 minutes. Thank you for your presence and support. If you haven't clicked the like button yet, please do so. I appreciate you. I really, if you could follow me on Instagram, that will be great as well. I will continue to cover some of the developments and some of my favorite releases from Watches and Wonders 2023 tomorrow as well. I'll come back to doing the Sotheby's auction preview as well as other auction previews from Ineichen Zurich, Monaco Legends Group, as well as the usual suspects, of course, Christie's, Phillips, Bonhams, and others. I continue to provide some exclusive content on Patreon that has a very clear tiered system, but I basically supply a few, usually 3, sometimes more, specific deals that I curate from listings online. And I have those recordings with the explicit purpose of providing historical and horological backgrounds, so you can, even if you don't take advantage of those specific deals, learn something in the process, deepen your knowledge in terms of vintage, neo-vintage, and contemporary watches. And it certainly allows you to maintain a direct line of communication with me. But most importantly, and I want to remind you of this ever so slightly and kindly, it allows this channel to remain the autonomous, fully independent platform that it is. I don't have any sponsors. I'm not in the pocket of the industry. I don't, I don't get commissions or anything of the sorts from gray market profiteers. I'm here as your advocate. I'm here to provide my neutral and informed opinion for you that has been, of course, itself formed and informed by my own experience as a collector for now 2 decades. So if you would like to contribute to keep this platform as fully autonomous, as a platform that is completely at the behest of its audience, that works only for its audience, for its followers, for its subscribers, please contribute. You will see the links in the description of the video. I am also pinning it now in the chat as well. I would appreciate it. In either case, thank you again for being here. Rolex with 41% ends up being the winner of our releases, the champion, which is not surprising at all. It's easy to impress when people already are trained to appreciate whatever you release. And I also want to thank all the people who have super chatted in this session for this live stream. Thank you. This platform not only survives but thrives thanks to you, Nick Butter, Flat 4, Ali Reza, MCM, and Jake Brooks. I appreciate all of you. Everyone else who has contributed to the conversation, who has asked questions, who has intervened from the chat. I'm so grateful. Thank you for being here. Thank you for tuning in. I'll be with you tomorrow with some more content, and most certainly for the live stream again at night in the PM with the late show, where we'll be talking about more new releases. We'll certainly talk about Rolex and Tudor, but as was the case tonight, we will also always take a broader perspective that integrates brands, small and big, high horological or more artistic and design oriented, independent or gigantic. This channel has space for all. It has a place for everybody, and I always have time for you. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for staying with me. I look forward to talking watches with you tomorrow. Please hit the like button on the way out if you would like to contribute to the channel in any way, whether you benefit from the Patreon, send something with PayPal or the Cash App, or with a super chat. I genuinely appreciate you. I will see you tomorrow. Until then, stay safe and enjoy your watches. Much love. Bye.